It was a quiet Sunday afternoon at a small roadside diner just off Route 27, the kind of place where the scent of grilled bacon and burnt coffee lingered in the air, where truckers and travelers came and went without much fuss, and where the regulars knew every waitress by name. The bell above the door jingled as a woman stepped inside, her long brown hair slightly tangled from the wind, her clothes dusty, her face pale with exhaustion. She looked like she'd been driving for hours. Her belly was round, unmistakably pregnant, and she moved with that careful, slow grace that only expectant mothers have. The waitress behind the counter, a tired girl chewing gum, barely glanced up before muttering, "Sit wherever you want." The woman smiled weakly, took a seat in the corner, and rubbed her swollen feet beneath the table. Moments later, a young waiter came over, lean, restless, the kind of guy who thought customer service was beneath him, and slapped a menu down in front of her. "What'll it be?" he said flatly. "Just some water, please," she said softly, "and maybe a sandwich, if that's okay." The waiter rolled his eyes. "We don't do charity here. You gonna order or not?" The woman hesitated, fumbling for her purse. "I'll pay," she said quickly. "Just give me a minute." But when she opened the small handbag, a few crumpled bills fell out, along with a photo, a man in a leather vest standing beside a row of motorcycles, his arm around her shoulders. The waiter picked it up, scoffed, and said under his breath, "Figures." "Excuse me?" she asked quietly. "Nothing," he muttered, walking away. When he returned, he didn't bring food. Instead, he slammed a glass of water on the table so hard that some of it splashed onto her lap. She gasped, startled, but before she could react, he sneered, "Next time, try not to waste people's time if you can't afford to eat." The diner went silent. A few customers turned their heads, but no one said a word. The woman's lips trembled, her eyes filling with tears. She whispered, "You don't understand," but the waiter cut her off. "No, you don't understand. We don't need freeloaders around here." And then, in one stupid, cruel moment, he grabbed the remaining water in the glass and tossed it across the table. It splashed across her shirt, soaking the photo she'd been holding. The woman gasped, standing up in shock, one hand instinctively covering her belly. "Get out," he said coldly. "Go find your biker boyfriend to feed you." The room went still. Every eye was on her. She didn't say another word. She just turned and walked out, shoulders trembling, head bowed. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving a silence so heavy it was almost suffocating. 10 minutes later, the bell over that same door rang again, but this time, the air shifted. Four massive men in black leather vests walked in, boots thudding against the tile. The name stitched across their backs read, "Steel Serpents MC." Their faces were hard, weathered, and silent. The one in front had eyes like steel, calm, cold, and dangerous. The waiter froze, tray in hand, the color draining from his face. The leader walked up to the counter, his voice quiet but sharp as glass. "Where's the kid who threw water at a woman?" The waitress pointed a trembling finger toward the waiter. He tried to stammer, "Yes sir, it was just a misunderstanding," but the biker interrupted him, stepping close enough that the younger man could see the scars on his knuckles. "You threw water at my wife." The diner went dead silent. No one dared breathe. The biker didn't shout. He didn't raise his fist. He just leaned closer and said, "Do you have any idea what happens when a man disrespects a woman who's carrying my child?" The waiter swallowed hard, shaking his head. The biker straightened up, glanced around at the terrified staff, and then did something no one expected. He pulled out a wad of $100 bills and placed it on the counter. "That's for the damage your stupidity caused to her clothes, her pride, and her day. You keep the money," he said, his voice calm but heavy with warning, "because next time someone like her walks in here hungry, you're gonna serve her a meal like she's family. And if I ever hear otherwise," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The silence was louder than any threat could ever be. Then he turned toward the door, nodded to his men, and said, "Let's go." But before leaving, he looked back at the waiter, his gaze steady and cold. You're lucky she asked me not to hurt you. She said you looked young. Said maybe you just needed to learn respect. And with that, they walked out, the roar of motorcycle engines shaking the diner's windows moments later. The waiter stood there trembling, staring at the wet floor where the pregnant woman had stood earlier. He didn't move for a long time. The next morning, he came back to work early, cleaned every table himself, and when the same woman returned days later, this time with her husband beside her, smiling gently instead of glaring, the waiter nearly fell over trying to serve her. He brought her the best meal on the menu, refused her money, and said softly, "Ma'am, I'm so sorry." She smiled, holding her husband's hand, and said, "Apology accepted. Just remember, everyone's fighting a battle you can't see." And from that day forward, the diner changed. No one ever mocked another customer again, and the story of the biker's wife became legend, a reminder that respect costs nothing, but arrogance can cost you everything. Weeks after that unforgettable day when the roar of motorcycles had rattled the diner's windows and the arrogant waiter's ego had been crushed by a lesson he would never forget, the small roadside cafe on Route 27 began to change in ways no one could have predicted, because though the biker and his pregnant wife never returned for vengeance, their story echoed through the town like a whispered parable of humility, spreading from truckers to townsfolk, from one diner to another, until everyone seemed to know about the foolish young waiter who had disrespected a pregnant woman only to discover she was married to the leader of one of the most feared biker clubs in the state. The owner of the diner, a gruff old man named Howard, who'd built his business on reputation and respect, called an emergency staff meeting the following morning. He stood at the front of the dining room, arms crossed, glaring at his employees. "You all heard what happened," he growled. "You let a customer get humiliated in my diner. I don't care if she looked broke, I don't care if she ordered water, you treat everyone who walks through that door like they're your own mother. You got it?" His gaze landed on the young waiter, whose name was Kyle, and the boy could barely lift his head. The other servers avoided his eyes. The guilt was crushing. That night, after closing, Kyle sat alone in the empty diner, staring at the same booth where the woman had sat, the faint stain of spilled water still visible on the table's surface. He could still hear the biker's calm, terrifying voice in his head, the weight of that unspoken threat lingering in his chest like an anchor. But what haunted him more wasn't the fear, it was the look on the woman's face, the mix of hurt, sadness, and quiet dignity. She hadn't cursed him, hadn't raised her voice, hadn't defended herself. She'd simply left, carrying her pain with her. That image gnawed at him. For days, he barely spoke. He came to work early, stayed late, cleaned, repaired, and apologized to every customer as if trying to cleanse his conscience one act of kindness at a time. Howard noticed the change but said nothing. Then, one afternoon, a group of bikers pulled into the diner again, different men, but wearing the same black leather vests with "Steel Serpents MC" stitched across the back. The customers fell silent. Kyle froze behind the counter, every muscle in his body tightening. The tallest biker, a bearded man with tattoos creeping up his neck, approached the counter and said in a low voice, "You Kyle?" He nodded nervously. "Boss wanted me to check in," the man said, sliding a small envelope across the counter. "She said you'd understand." The man gave a faint grin, turned, and left before Kyle could say a word. Trembling, Kyle opened the envelope. Inside was a note written in neat handwriting: "Respect isn't about fear. It's about kindness. I forgive you, but make sure the next person you serve never feels like I did that day." There was no signature, just a small drawing of a rose in the corner. Kyle sat there for a long time, staring at the note, his throat tightening. It was from her, the biker's wife. She had gone out of her way to reach him, not to punish him, but to teach him. And that single act of grace changed him forever. From that day on, Kyle became known for being the kindest waiter anyone had ever met. He'd help elderly customers to their cars, refill coffee for free, buy meals for homeless drifters, and smile at everyone who came through the door. Regulars began tipping more, saying they liked the new energy in the place. Within months, the diner's reputation improved so much that truckers deliberately detoured just to stop there, calling it the kind